Hello, and welcome. Hope you're all doing great. Today, we have an exciting topic to dive into, the biggest differences between the MCU and Marvel Comics that completely change the story. Let's go. Today, we've got two major facts for you about the differences between the MCU and Marvel Comics. And honestly, the MCU has changed a lot of things from the comics. What we've seen in the movies is completely different, to the point where the MCU has basically created its own separate universe. Now, let's get into the first one. 1. Ultron. In Avengers: Age of Ultron, Ultron was more of a one-time threat rather than a recurring, powerful villain for the Avengers. But in the comics, he wasn't just a single-use enemy. He was a major recurring threat that wouldn't just die and disappear. The biggest change? In the MCU, Ultron was created by Tony Stark, while in the comics, Ultron was actually created by Hank Pym, the original Ant-Man. And no, that's not the only difference. The entire story was changed. In the movies, the Avengers fight and eventually defeat Ultron in just one film. They destroy his entire army, and that's it, game over. But in the comics, Ultron wins. He completely destroys the Avengers, takes over the entire world with his army of Sentinels, and achieves his goal. So, how does he get defeated? Well, the Avengers don't defeat him. Instead, Wolverine, who hasn't even been in the MCU, travels back in time and prevents Ultron from ever being created in the first place. So, yeah, a completely different story from what we saw in the movie. 2. Thanos. Now, let's talk about Thanos. Josh Brolin's portrayal of Thanos was one of the best villain performances we've seen in the MCU. He was given 2 whole movies, something no other villain got. His character was deep, his motivations were complex, and he was trying to save the universe by eliminating half of all life to solve overpopulation and resource scarcity. But in the comics, Thanos wasn't some morally gray villain. He was straight up evil. In the comics, Thanos didn't wipe out half the universe because of resources. He did it because he was in love with death, a cosmic entity representing the void of existence. In Marvel Comics, Death is portrayed as a woman, and Thanos was so obsessed with impressing her that he wiped out half of all life in the universe just to gain her favor. Completely different from the philosophical villain we saw in the movies, right? 3. The Avengers. Now, let's talk about the Avengers. The original founding members of the Avengers in the MCU are Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Hulk, Black Widow, and Hawkeye. But in the comics, the original Avengers were completely different. The first Avengers team in the comics consisted of Thor, Iron Man, Hulk, Ant-Man, and Wasp. Captain America didn't even join until later in Avengers number 4. And here's the biggest shocker: Hawkeye and Black Widow weren't even on the original team. They didn't join until years later. So, yeah, the MCU took a lot of creative liberties when forming the Avengers, but let's be honest, it totally worked. The 2012 Avengers movie was a massive success, and people loved the team they put together. 4. Planet Hulk. Now, this one really upsets me. Planet Hulk is one of the best-selling Hulk comics of all time, and it's a masterpiece. In the comics, Hulk is banished into space by the Illuminati, a secret group of Marvel heroes, and he crash lands on the planet Sakaar. There, he becomes a gladiator, fights in an arena, and rises to power. He even falls in love, gets married, and has children. But then, his spaceship explodes, killing his wife and children. This makes Hulk angrier than he's ever been, and he returns to Earth, completely destroys the planet, and enslaves the Avengers. But in the MCU, we barely got a fraction of this story in Thor: Ragnarok. Instead of being a warrior king, Hulk was reduced to a joke, a mere gladiator slave in a goofy setting. He never attacks Earth, he never destroys anything, and his character arc from the comics was completely erased. Honestly, I really hope the MCU gives us a proper Planet Hulk or Immortal Hulk adaptation one day, because the Hulk we saw in the movies just wasn't the real Hulk. 5. Civil War. Okay, let's talk about Civil War. The Captain America Civil War movie was loosely based on the comic storyline, where Captain America and Iron Man clash over whether superheroes should be registered under government control. But in the comics, Civil War was way more intense. The whole conflict starts when a group of young heroes accidentally blow up a school, killing 500 kids. This triggers the Superhero Registration Act, which forces all heroes to reveal their identities and work under the government. And in the comics, people die. Iron Man even builds a robot version of Thor, which ends up killing one of the Avengers. In the MCU, the biggest casualty is War Machine getting paralyzed. But in the comics, it's a full-on war where heroes betray and kill each other. One of the most iconic moments in the comics? Spider-Man unmasks himself on live TV, revealing his true identity to the world. But in the MCU, that never happened. 6. Spider-Man, Tom Holland's version. Tom Holland's Spider-Man is completely different from the classic comic version. In the MCU, Spider-Man is heavily connected to Iron Man, who acts as his mentor. His suit is made by Stark Industries, and he doesn't have the same independent, street-level struggles as the classic Peter Parker from the comics. And let's talk about his friends. In the MCU, Harry Osborn and Gwen Stacy don't exist. Instead, Peter's best friend is Ned Leeds, and his love interest isn't Mary Jane. It's Michelle Jones, MJ, a totally original character. Sure, the MCU's Spider-Man is great, but he's very different from the comic book version. 7. Gore the God Butcher. Let's end this with Gore the God Butcher from Thor: Love and Thunder. When Christian Bale was cast, fans were hyped. Gore is one of the most brutal and terrifying villains in Marvel Comics. He's basically Marvel's Kratos, slaughtering gods in the most horrific ways. But in the movie, they toned him down to keep things lighthearted. In the comics, Gore butchers Thor's entire pantheon and nearly wipes out all gods. But in the MCU, he only kills a few gods off-screen and barely does anything terrifying. Honestly, it was a huge letdown. And that's it. These are some of the biggest differences between the MCU and Marvel Comics. What do you think? Let us know in the comments so we can discuss. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It's the biggest way to support us. Alright, that's it for now. See you in the next video.